Canada will be receiving a vaccine to battle COVID-19. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that by the end of December, we'll be receiving around 249,000 doses. Joining me now to discuss this in a little more detail is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley from the Toronto Sun. Brian, the 249,000 doses is only enough to vaccinate, what, less than 0.5% of the population of Canada? Why such a low number?
Because that's what they could get. We've been hearing for weeks now, this whole issue of when will we get the vaccine started with comments directly from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying Canadians will have to wait behind other countries and watch other countries be vaccinated first. And that led people to say, well, why? When are we getting the vaccine? And of course, these comments came as both Pfizer and Moderna, the two early and leading candidates for vaccination, had put in requests for emergency use with the FDA in the United States and with the National Health Service in Britain. They've been approved in the National Health Service. They'll likely be approved by the FDA later this week. And the Brits and the Americans immediately said, if it gets approval, this is when we will vaccinate. And so both opposition politicians and people like myself in the media started saying, okay, well, if Health Canada approves, how soon after can we get the vaccine? And the Prime Minister didn't want to say. No one in the government wanted to say. They just kept saying things like, sometime in the third quarter. Well, that's from January 1st until March 31st. That's a long time. The government wouldn't give an answer better than that. I obtained documents last week from the military planning, General Jonathan Vance saying, don't expect vaccines until the spring thaw. So that's mid to late March. That got a lot of people worried. The government found a way to get up to, I want to be careful here because the Prime Minister emphasized this, up to 249,000 doses. I have to applaud him, Hal. I said if you got vaccine early, I would applaud him, and so I am. But it is just enough to vaccinate, if we get the full allotment, 124,500 people. It's going to be divided up by province, by population. So Ontario will get about between 95, 99,000, and then it goes on from there. So Alberta will get maybe about a third of that. So enough to vaccinate maybe 15,000 people in Alberta. Here's part of the problem, though, is that that doesn't even look after all of our healthcare workers. It doesn't look after our frontline staff. It is something, but the main vaccination won't be happening until much later in late winter or early spring.
Yeah, the big question is who actually gets the vaccine first? Possibly the healthcare workers, some of our seniors. And how about the rest of us Canadians? Maybe by what, September? Is that what the Prime Minister said?
Well, they're trying to come up. Bottom line is it lies with the provinces, but there are, tables, at work between the federal and provincial governments, always discussing issues like this. And everyone seems to be on the same page. We saw the photos, the videos coming out of Britain the other day, the 90-year-old woman being the first person to be vaccinated outside of a clinical trial. William Shakespeare was the second guy. These were people in care homes. That will be the first. The people that care for people in care homes and the frontline healthcare workers will go next. And then eventually the rest of us. I wouldn't say that someone like you or I would be looking at getting a vaccine before summer, maybe late spring, but possibly summer. By the time we get through, we're expecting 6 million doses by the end of March. That's enough to vaccinate 3 million people. That would essentially take care of our healthcare workers, the most essential of them, and people over the age of 80. Then you start going down, people from 70 to 79. They're the next most at-risk group. People that have heart conditions fit into that. General Rick Hillier, who is leading Ontario's vaccine distribution program, said, don't expect things to ramp up really until April 1st. And then after that, it will take 6 to 9 months to look after the rest of us.
And we'll probably see some of the doses going out to a lot of our Indigenous communities as well here.
Yeah, and there is discussion about how they handle that. Is there a set aside for Indigenous communities? Is it part of the provincial allotment? I can tell you that if you are in a remote Indigenous community, you're not going to be getting vaccinated with these first batches of the Pfizer vaccine. What we really have to hope for to speed up the vaccination program is that the vaccines from Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca come online quicker. Both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines need to be kept very cold. Pfizer at -70. And so far, the instructions from the company are once you move it, do not move it again. So once it's delivered, it can't go anywhere else. Well, across most of the country, the places that have freezers that can handle -70, Hal, those tend to be in major hospitals, research hospitals, in our major centers. So unless you can get to that location, you won't get that first batch of vaccine. So even people that are unable to move in long-term care homes may not get early doses of the vaccine. And it's definitely not going up to remote reserves. If you're next to an urban center, you might be in line.
Now, an important issue has been raised when it comes to liability, Brian. Some people are really concerned that this vaccine has been rushed, and there are questions about whether anyone will suffer any serious side effects as a result. Has the government really made that clear?
They haven't made it clear, but there tends to be a situation in, or an arrangement in situations like this for vaccines that the manufacturer for a pandemic vaccine will not be held liable. That liability will fall to the government of the day. And look, those are legitimate concerns on the issue of side effects. You don't have to be an anti-vaxxer to be concerned about side effects. One, these vaccines have been rushed for a good reason. They've been rushed. We want to get out of this bizarre life that we've all been living since COVID-19 hit, and a vaccine's one of the ways out. Secondly, there is also the issue of the first two candidates, both Pfizer and Moderna, are what's called mRNA vaccines. It's a new type of vaccine. It's not the traditional style. It has not been widely used before. It's been experimental. They've been trying to use it for things like cancer. There's a company just a few steps away from where I'm sitting now they're working at a Canadian company trying to come up with a COVID vaccine using this style, but their whole program before COVID was trying to find a cancer vaccine. It's been attempted for AIDS, so far unsuccessfully, but that's where this style of vaccine has been used. It's not widely used. So if there are serious side effects, who do you sue? The answer is likely going to be the federal government.
Now, there's been a lot of chatter of a possible reset to the economy. Brian, a lot of people are quite concerned about that. You've said the Liberals have been on again and off again with the idea, with the new appointment of a top bureaucrat. Now, you said the Liberals may actually be back on the reset bandwagon once again?
Yeah, this is the on again, off again saga. Remember, all through the summer, the Liberals were talking to every journalist they could find in Ottawa, and you'd see stories about how they're going to reframe the economy, reshape the economy, reset all these things. And then in the lead up to the throne speech, maybe about a week, 2 weeks out, you started seeing stories saying, the Liberals are now focused just on the pandemic. Turns out the idea of using the pandemic as an excuse to completely alter Canada's economic system didn't fly too well when it was polled, when they did focus groups. People said, can you just look after the pandemic and forget about these grand plans? So it was they said it was going on the back burner. Then the throne speech happened, and I said, no, that's still in there. Then the economic statement happened, and it's still in there. But an interesting thing happened. The day after the economic statement, the top official, the top bureaucrat at the Department of Finance, a guy named Paul Rochon, resigned. That's bizarre. The day after a massive fiscal document like this is delivered in the middle of a pandemic, that this guy just announces, I'm done. And then immediately thereafter, they announce Michael Sabia is going in. Now, normally nobody cares who the bureaucrats are, but Michael Sabia is not a bureaucrat. This is a political appointment to a bureaucratic post. That is something the Liberals would have criticized any previous government heavily for. Michael Sabia is someone who used to work at Bell, he used to work at CN Rail, ran the Quebec pension plan, but most importantly, he is politically on side Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland on this idea of using this crisis as a grand reset to fundamentally reshape the Canadian economy. That's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, but now that it's just a faceless bureaucrat in the background, well, the government can just get along with doing it and not talking about it.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apparently has a very important meeting on healthcare later this week. It's to talk about regular health transfers. Now, Brian, you recently wrote that this shows why the premiers should just say no to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's call for more national social programs like childcare.
Yeah, well, look, the fiscal update that we were just talking about called for a national child care program, a national pharmacare program, for national standards in long-term care. And some people might say, well, that's all fine. Why don't we have those? Why don't we have a national program for these? Well, all of these things are provincial jurisdiction, which means under the Constitution, the provinces are responsible for them. Under the healthcare deal that was struck when we brought out Medicare in the 1960s, the federal government said, hey, provinces, you sign on to this, you do this great program with us, we will pay 50% of the bill, you pay the other 50%, it'll be a great partnership, hand in hand, we'll do it. Well, since the 60s, it's just been dropping off, dropping off, dropping off. By the mid-70s, under Pierre Trudeau, it was down to 35%, the federal government share. By the mid-90s, under Chrétien, it was 14%. Under Paul Martin and Stephen Harper, it rose up to 22% by 2006 and stayed there until now. And so if someone's paying less than half of the bill that they said they would, Hal, and they come on and they say, hey, let's do another deal, are you going to say, yeah, you know what, that sounds great. Why don't I put out billions of dollars that I don't have, and you'll put up the other billions and then walk away and not pay the bill later? They can't, if the feds won't pay their fair share of the bill for healthcare, what makes you think that after a year or two, they're going to keep paying for childcare and pharmacare and long-term care? It simply won't happen. I'm not a fan of governments passing money around. I know the saying there's only one taxpayer, but whatever level of government is responsible for delivering the service is the one that I think should be taxing you for it. That way you know who to blame if things go wrong.
Brian, it's coming up on 2 years now since the two Canadian Michaels, Spavor and Kovrig, were abducted in China. Our Foreign Affairs Minister says progress is finally being made to potentially bring them home.
Well, that's what Francois-Philippe Champagne is saying, but he's not giving too many specifics. Not that I blame him. This is a sensitive and ongoing discussion. But I'm of the view, after talking to many people, that here's my worry, Hal, that China may be asking for a lot more than just the release of Meng Wanzhou. You've heard that Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei CFO, who was detained in Vancouver 2 years ago, may end up striking a deal with the U.S. Department of Justice. The Americans want her. We have her on an extradition warrant. She's fighting it in Canada. This could drag on for years. And the Department of Justice has apparently said, you know what? Admit you're guilty, pay a fine. There will be some penalties for the company and you can go home. So far, she's always rejected that. Now they're in negotiations. And a lot of Canadians said, if she goes home, they'll release Kovrig and Spavor. Not necessarily. Canada's not part of the discussions between the Department of Justice and Ms. Meng. And I spoke to several people, former diplomats, who said there's a good chance that China will ask for more, including things like, do you remember CNOOC trying to buy Nexen, or buying Nexen in the oil patch? And then the Harper government said, well, we're going to have to review if a state enterprise wants to buy into our natural resources. China wants that lifted. They want other economic restrictions on them lifted. They may make demands like that in return for freeing Kovrig and Spavor. Demands that would not sit well in Canada, other than the fact that would get the two Michaels home. Whether to be home by Christmas, who knows? And
a Christmas card campaign has been launched for the two Michaels, even though the cards may not actually reach them. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is guys like Guy Saint-Jacques, former ambassador, Charles Burton, former Canadian diplomat and retired professor with an expertise in China. Them and a bunch of others got together and said, you know what, let's put pressure on Chinese diplomats. And here's what you do. You take a Christmas card, you sign it, you fill it with best wishes for Kovrig and for Spavor, individually or together. You put it in an envelope, address it to them, put that envelope inside a bigger one and address that to the embassy in Ottawa or to the Chinese consulate, and have them open it and see the card and feel shame and pressure for doing it. Now, I've had a couple of reactions to this. What does it accomplish? One, it would be pressure. It's one way of reminding them that Canadians have not forgotten about these two men. I've had other people say, well, China's not Christian, so it doesn't matter. How there are millions upon millions of Christians in China of all sorts. We don't have an easy count on them because many of them belong to illegal churches, but I'll give you one quick stat. The Catholic Church, which is a small one in China, has more members in that country than there are Canadians, and it's an illegal small church.
Wow.
So there are lots and lots of Christians in China, and there are lots of people that would support them. So yeah, think about doing that. And the other thing they ask you to do, snap a photo, post it on social media with the hashtag #FreeChinaHostages, and keep up the pressure.
That's a great idea. Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.